The smell of Paris in 1944 was not the smell of butter and yeast. It was the smell of sawdust and substitute flour made from ground beans. For Jean-Pierre, a baker whose family had owned the same boulangerie in Montmartre since the French Revolution, the German occupation was a slow starvation of the soul. Every morning at 5 a.m., a German officer named Captain Weiss would enter the shop. He was always polite, his boots always polished to a mirror shine. He would buy the best baguette available, the officer's bread, while the line of Parisian mothers outside waited for their meager, gray rations. "A beautiful morning, Jean-Pierre," Weiss would say, laying a crisp bill on the counter. Jean-Pierre would nod, his face a mask of stone. He hated the man's politeness more than his uniform. But Jean-Pierre had a secret hidden in the heat of his ovens. He was part of a small cell that specialized in the paper war. Inside the double-bottomed baskets used to deliver bread to the local hospital, Jean-Pierre hid forged identity papers and maps for downed Allied airmen. One morning, the tension snapped. The resistance had stepped up its attacks, and the Gestapo was raiding every shop on the street. As Jean-Pierre was sliding a tray of loaves into the brick oven, the bells above the door didn't jingle. The door was kicked open. Weiss walked in, but he wasn't alone. 2 soldiers followed, their rifles leveled. "We found a printing press 3 doors down," Weiss said, his voice stripped of its usual warmth. "They say the ink came from a baker's delivery man." Jean-Pierre's heart hammered against his ribs like a trapped bird. In the cooling rack sat a loaf of bread that was heavier than the others. Inside the crust was a microfilm containing the coastal defenses of Normandy. "Search the back," Weiss commanded. The soldiers tore through the flour sacks, white dust filling the air like a localized blizzard. They kicked over the mixing bowls. Finally, one soldier walked toward the cooling rack. He reached for the heavy loaf. "Wait," Jean-Pierre said, his voice cracking. He grabbed a different loaf, the one intended for the captain. "That one is stale, Captain. A mistake. Take this one. It's the last of the white flour." Weiss looked at Jean-Pierre. He looked at the heavy loaf the soldier was still holding. A long, agonizing silence filled the shop. The smell of burning flour hung heavy in the air. Weiss stepped forward. He took the officer's bread from Jean-Pierre's hand. Then he turned to the soldier and slapped the heavy loaf out of his hand. It hit the floor with a dull thud. "Leave it," Weiss said. "The baker is a fool, not a spy. He can't even bake a loaf that stays together." The Germans left. Jean-Pierre collapsed against the flour-dusted counter, his lows burning. He realized then that Weiss had seen the way the loaf fell. He had known. Perhaps the captain was tired of the war. Perhaps he was simply human for a single fleeting second. 2 weeks later, the bells of Paris began to ring. Not the alarm bells, but the bells of liberation. The tanks of the French 2nd Armored Division rolled down the cobblestones, draped in flowers and wine. Jean-Pierre stood in the door of his shop. He didn't have much, but he had managed to save a small jar of real sugar and a bag of white flour. He baked a single perfect tray of croissants. As the crowds cheered, he handed them out to the children. He looked down at the spot on the floor where the heavy loaf had fallen. The war had taken his youth, his health, and his peace of mind. But as he bit into a piece of real bread for the first time in 4 years, Jean-Pierre realized that the flavor of freedom wasn't sweet, it was the simple, honest taste of crust and salt, earned in the dark and shared in the light.